Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live today on a Tuesday afternoon. Today is October 22nd and we have a lot to dive into. We have a couple Monday Night Football games from last night that we are going to talk about. The Baltimore Ravens continue to roll, winning their fifth straight game, this time against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and some very unfortunate injuries occurred for Tampa Bay to the point where their season may be on the brink now. So we're going to be diving into that game. We're also going to be discussing the Arizona Cardinals pulling off a late game comeback against the Los Angeles Chargers. Are the Cardinals in this weird, wacky season going to be able to have enough to make a playoff push? We'll be diving into that as well. Then we are going to be talking about one of the straggler games from Sunday that we didn't get to cover yesterday, talking about Saquon Barkley's return to MetLife Stadium, this time as a Philadelphia Eagle, and the Eagles dominated that game as well. So we're going to be talking about whether or not the Eagles are back on the right track, and then we are going to be doing our NFL Panic Meter, talking about some of the most prominent teams in the NFL that lost this past weekend, ranking them on a scale of 1 to 10 based off of how concerned fans and the organization should be following these losses. And then finally, we are going to finish off the show by previewing tonight's NBA matchups. The regular season is finally upon us. We'll be talking Celtics, Knicks, and Lakers, Timberwolves, so you'll want to stick around for that as well. But before we get into everything, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the chat or comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make the show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube, or you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a tip or donation, your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. We're going to start off by talking about the Baltimore Ravens' dominant win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last night. And the final score would tell you that this game was a little bit closer than it actually was. The Buccaneers did put up a significant amount of points in the fourth quarter off of an onside kick and just some garbage time points that made this game a little bit closer than it truly felt. This game was pretty much all Ravens. Now, that being said, it was, of course, the Buccaneers who got out to a hot start early on. They took a quick 10-0 lead, and everything just sort of spiraled from there. And specifically, it seemed like it sort of spiraled from the moment that Mike Evans went down with a hamstring injury. He caught the first touchdown for Tampa Bay, and then it was on that second drive. Baker had made a throw to him towards the back of the end zone, and he ended up re-aggravating a hamstring injury that he had been dealing with coming into this game. You could see him being worked on a little bit on the sideline following that first touchdown, and then he did not get back up after that second one, and he is now expected to be out for a few weeks. And we don't have an exact timetable there, but it seems like it might be after their bye week, a few weeks from now, which might be a bit of a disastrous problem for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point. We'll dive into the specifics of the game in a moment here, but losing Evans for the next few weeks, and then on top of that, in the final minute of the game, losing Chris Godwin with a dislocated ankle. It hasn't been quite confirmed yet, but that is what head coach Todd Bowles has said that it's looking like, and he is expected to miss the remainder of the season. So the Buccaneers lose each of their top two receiving threats, and it feels like this might be kind of the straw that broke the camel's back at this point. The Buccaneers are still a good, solid team, and I'm not fully writing them off just yet. But that being said, they are going to probably be without Godwin for the entire season now. Evans will likely be gone for the next few weeks as well. And the upcoming schedule for the Buccaneers, it goes versus Atlanta next weekend, and what could be a pivotal game for the division race, the Falcons won on Thursday Night Football a few weeks ago in Week 5 to get the one-up on Tampa Bay in that game, and now a season sweep might just be detrimental for the Buccaneers because obviously in the NFC, the wild card race is going to be extremely tough to fight your way into based off of how well the NFC North has been playing up to this point. The 49ers as well are potentially now in the mix for that wild card spot, and I think that the Buccaneers are in a lot of trouble as things currently stand. Now, I do want to circle back around to them, but I want to talk about this game in particular as well because this was yet another dominant game from the Baltimore Ravens. And again, I know that there was maybe some concern down the stretch of this game about would they be able to hold on to it. Personally, they pretty much had it wrapped up this entire time from that Derrick Henry touchdown with about 6.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They took a 41-18 lead. Yeah, Tampa is able to pour it on a little bit at the very end of the game, but this was, again, mostly all Tampa Bay, where they just, after that first drive of, them not being able to get themselves together, a crucial sack, the offensive line was getting pushed around a little bit. Baltimore was just able to be off and running, and it continues to be that two-headed monster of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, where Lamar last night, one of the most impressive stat lines of his entire career, 17 of 22, 281 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, add another 52 rushing yards as well to that. Derrick Henry, 15 carries, 169 rushing yards, and then he had a receiving touchdown as well late in the game to sort of ice this one. So that combination has just been so deadly. And as much as, again, yes, in theory, the Buccaneers were sort of making things interesting down the stretch of this game, it really was the Ravens. And, when you look at the usage of Derrick Henry, he wasn't being utilized all that much for a lot of this game. But ultimately, he was able to, yet again, serve as almost this closer for the Ravens based off of the fact that he just continues to have these timely, big-time plays late in the game that sort of iced this one out. In this game in particular, it was late in the third quarter. That point, 27-10 ball game, and Derrick Henry, backed up on his own 8-yard line, breaks off an 81-yard rush, which puts the Ravens in the red zone. They ultimately cap it off with a Mark Andrews touchdown. Mark Andrews, by the way, may be rearing a corner a little bit in terms of his overall level of production. 2 touchdowns in this game, adds on to the touchdown that he scored, I believe it was last week against the Washington Commanders. That really important to see for the Ravens of having Mark Andrews at least be a red zone threat. I don't think that based off of the way that this Ravens team plays and how much they look to be establishing the run game, that they don't need Mark Andrews to be any sort of a, receiving yards superstar in that 80 to 100 range and have the high volume that he had for so many years. It's more about just posing a threat for those big moments, third downs in the red zone. And, it's been encouraging to see for Mark Andrews to be able to step up his game a little bit. 3 consecutive games of 40 or more receiving yards, 3 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. Ultimately, I think that is a very good sign based off of where Mark Andrews was at coming into the season. So, I think that sort of circling this back to Derrick Henry and his overall usage, Jim Harbaugh talked about it, or John Harbaugh, talked about it early on in the season, that Derrick Henry, the plan isn't for him to be this workhorse running back. And, when they've needed him, he's come through. It's not like he's been, 30 carries a game or anything like that, but he is still massively impactful. And again, it just feels like late in these games, obviously, like I mentioned, the 81-yard rush in this game, you go back to Cincinnati and the huge run that he had in overtime of that one to sort of set them up for the game-winning field goal then. Derrick Henry is basically the closer of this group, where the Ravens have always been a team that ultimately, they run when everything is on script for them. They play very well. They're able to sit on leads, milk the clock, use the run game to their advantage to kill clock. And, that's always sort of been the real strength of this Ravens offense. And, now adding Derrick Henry to that is just the ultimate sort of closing situation where it's so hard. And I understand the Ravens even still have maybe had some issues. That Raiders game in particular is the one that really got away from them. Some people point to the Cowboys and how, that game got a little bit closer than it had to. And ultimately, they did need to convert on a couple third downs to be able to hold on to that game. But they did so then. They do so in this game as well. I just feel like Derrick Henry is the perfect complement to Lamar Jackson. It's what we've been talking about since the moment he signed there in Baltimore. And I just think it's been a match made in heaven up to this point. So the Ravens are cruising at this point. Now 5-2. They have taken the lead in the AFC North as well. Over the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now the Steelers are neck and neck with them even still. It's more so just that the Ravens have that divisional win to edge out the Steelers at this current moment. But, I think that this is the Ravens that we were more so anticipating coming into the season. Something that, we talked about a little bit in the preview yesterday this is something that we talked about on Friday more so in the best bets, because we did have Ravens -3.5. Is that the secondary and the passing defense still has not been great up to this point, and a lot of the stats coming in garbage time, albeit for Baker Mayfield. But the Ravens have still struggled in terms of passing defense up to this point in the year, and I am sort of having a hard time wrapping my head around why that might be, because they do have a pretty talented secondary with Kyle Hamilton, with Marlon Humphrey. Nate Wiggins has shown some promise as well. So the fact that they are struggling against the pass so much this year is a little bit of a surprise. I mean, the Ravens are still top 20 in pass rush win rate. It's not like they are getting zero pressure for them. And again, the secondary is good enough that something to be concerned about, I suppose, when it ultimately comes to the playoffs rearing its head there. So we will see. It is just sort of a long-term issue for the Ravens defense right now. We'll see ultimately, how this shakes out for them in terms of can they solidify that back end. But the Ravens are an incredible team, obviously. And, I think that for the most part, we can put sort of these worries about their team to rest. Now, on the Buccaneers side of things, like I mentioned, this is, by the way, just double checked. And obviously this is, not accounting for bye weeks or anything, but just quickly browsing here on NFL.com in terms of most yards allowed this season through the air. The Ravens are the worst team in the league with over 2,100. They are second to last in terms of yards per pass attempt allowed per game, 8.1. Only the Arizona Cardinals are worse. So that is certainly something to keep in mind as well with the Ravens. But on the Buccaneers side of things here, I'm very nervous for them. Their next 3 games against the Falcons, like we mentioned, and then it is at Kansas City and versus San Francisco. Those are 3 very tough matchups that they're probably going to be without their top 2 options. It's going to be a matter of, at this point, Liam Cohen, what are you made of as an offensive coordinator? One of his big points of emphasis coming into this Buccaneers team was being able to take the running game that was bottom of the league last season, at least make it into something that is more sustainable, which I do think that they have sort of been able to do up to this point in the year. And they're doing so with, now 3 running backs that are very capable for them. The emergence of Sean Tucker has been a big revelation for them. But between Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Sean Tucker, these are 3 legitimate running backs that can give you a little bit of different looks in each of their own respective aspects. And that's what the Buccaneers are going to have to be reliant on. But I'm nervous. I feel like this is where we see Baker Mayfield try and bite off more than he can chew, get into a little bit more of an erratic version of himself. I sort of sometimes like to put it as a discount Josh Allen, where sometimes Baker, when he doesn't feel like he has the talent around him, can get a little bit run happy and, turn into a little bit more of a gunslinger. I mean, he's always been a gunslinger of sorts, but, I think that he can play more mistake-prone football when he's sort of backed into corners like this, and he might have to. So this isn't even necessarily a criticism of him. Options are pretty slim for him right now, so we'll see how this plays out. It's going to be basically in these next 3 weeks of the season for the Buccaneers. Got to win at least one of those games to stay alive in the race. Falcons coming off of a loss as well, so it's not like they're in some sort of an insurmountable division, but they need to focus on themselves right now. This is a game, obviously, that they're playing against the Falcons, but you have to just sort of reflect internally and find out what that game plan is going to be moving forward without your top 2 guys. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section as we're going to turn the page to the other Monday Night Football game from last night between the Arizona Cardinals and the Los Angeles Chargers, in which we saw the Cardinals pull off a bit of a comeback on that final drive, ultimately hit the game-winning field goal. So we're going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we're going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the station. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Getting my way in to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the losing fits, I'm losing shit. It's goofing if you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose your gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we just finished talking about Buccaneers versus Ravens, and now we're going to be diving into the other Monday Night Football matchup from last night, the LA Chargers and the Arizona Cardinals. Ultimately, a little bit of a sloppy game from both sides from an offensive perspective. It is the Cardinals winning in what was a low-scoring affair. They end up hitting a walk-off field goal to win this game 17-15. So we'll start with the Cardinals here because they are just an enigma at this point. They are so hard to really place a finger on, where they have, just been so back and forth in terms of what you're going to get from them on a game-to-game basis where, their offense has been massively erratic for the majority of this season. We've seen huge performances from the offense in games like the Bills and the Rams early on, and then since then, It's been a lot of mediocrity. We've seen their defense really struggle in recent weeks, most notably allowing 42 points to the Washington Commanders a few weeks ago. Yet they come out in this game, and this is where I do think that Jonathan Gannon has proven his worth at least a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, that he is able to, and again, this is against a Chargers offense that doesn't have a ton of firepower necessarily. You look at, no disrespect by any means, but Will Dissly being the leading receiver for the Chargers. I mean, they have issues in their own right. But when you talk about these matchups where, the personnel offense to defense is a little bit more evened out, this defense can have success. And I am still a believer in Jonathan Gannon. I do think that, there are issues, and specifically on that defensive side of the ball, they are a little bit undermanned, very much reliant on young players, a lot of rookies involved in the mix as well, that they went out, they spent on a couple of, more veteran players that they're hoping can take on bigger roles for them moving forward, maybe, or at least be stopgap guys that can sort of, be reliable, at least in the meantime, while they try and, piece this all together. You look at the addition of Kaiser White from the other year, him now playing his second year in Arizona. Mac Wilson, linebacker from New England last season, they bring him over. Thought that Wilson made a number of impactful plays in this game as well. That this is a Cardinals team that they can compete. Now, offense is really where the volatility lies, and that's where I get so frustrated with this group and with Kyler Murray, because really this is a pretty solid overall offensive core. You have a fine offensive line for the Cardinals. They're not superstars by any means necessarily, but they can certainly hold their own. They have good players on the line for them as well, so it's not like Kyler has to be in this superhuman scrambling mode where he has to do everything. I mean, are they elite? Certainly not. But, they're definitely sustainable. I like the receiving options that they have in having now Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson is a fine option. Greg Dortch, I don't mind as a slot guy for them. You look at their numbers, though, and entirely underwhelming. And that's because Kyler as a whole in this game, 14 of 26, 145 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. I didn't even mention, by the way, in terms of all the pieces, they have a very good run game with James Conner as well. And Kyler is also a part of it. He rips off. And as much as, we can get on Kyler's case, I mean, he had the huge scramble touchdown that ultimately put the Cardinals up late in that game to the point where, they could survive a couple Chargers field goals and still be in position to win. So we get the great Kyler moments as well, but just the consistency of him is so underwhelming to me, and somebody that I've never been a huge fan of, but coming into this year, I thought things were going to be different, and it still feels very middling. And that's not fully on the shoulders of Kyler Murray. Like I mentioned, it's a fine offensive line. They could upgrade there. The fact that I mentioned Michael Wilson as one of the top receivers, I mean, maybe you want to ding that as that's a bad look, but Michael Wilson had a pretty solid rookie season, and that was with Josh Dobbs, being the quarterback for over half the season. That Wilson, I don't think he's a bad player whatsoever. Trey McBride has emerged as one of the bright young tight ends in the league as well. That I do still feel like I sit around waiting for more with the Cardinals, and I mean, they're very much alive in theory for a playoff push this season. They're currently 3-4 now after this win. We just talked about it with the Buccaneers on the previously in the last segment, the fact that the NFC playoff picture in terms of the wild card race is very much, a contested spot there. But first off, I'd also add NFC West. It is an open division right now. We're going to talk about the 49ers a bit here in terms of where they are currently at. But, I mean, they they are just so injured at this point where, Seattle, Arizona, they have chances at least to try and be able to overcome the 49ers. The Cardinals already won their head-to-head matchup against the 49ers. So, if the Cardinals can start to churn out some wins within the division here, it would be huge for them because they also beat the Rams in week 2 as well. So they are 2-0 in the division up to this point. And maybe we can see them sort of round a corner eventually. They have very winnable games on the schedule for the next few weeks. They are playing the Miami Dolphins this week. Still TBD. I guess Tua might play in this game. So we'll see about that. Would be a tougher matchup for sure if Tua is available for Miami. Then they're at home against the Bears. Early lean would be the Bears, but I'm just saying it's certainly possible that the Cardinals could win that game. And then the Jets at home as well. Then you get a bye week before your first matchup against Seattle. Extra time to prepare for that one in what could be a season-defining game there in week 12. So Cardinals definitely not out, but it seems like at this point with the Cardinals, whatever you expect them to do, they're just going to do the complete opposite of, let's put together a random, very nice defensive performance one night against a playoff hopeful Chargers team, which sort of leads me into the Chargers as well. And, a lot of people aren't necessarily there with it. I just have to have sympathy for Justin Herbert based off of how this tenure here with the Chargers has gone. I thought he was very good last night. 27 of 39, 349 yards. Now the issue is 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. I guess not a problem there, but the lack of getting in the end zone has become a huge problem for the Chargers, where they flashed some graphic. I think they were up to 12 or so consecutive drives without a touchdown. That must have been extended from that point on as well because they had to settle for another couple field goals after that. So all 15 points coming off of field goals. Justin Herbert is doing, I think, largely what he can with what he's given. And that's for a couple different reasons. Number one, should have had a touchdown pass to Jalen Reagor, but of course Reagor ends up fumbling into the end zone because, obviously that's what Jalen Reagor would do. That was his lone target of the night. And after that, it's certainly frustrating that the Chargers offense was, from that point on, completely unable to really move the ball in an effective way. Herbert was airing it out as much as he could, where he was going to Will Dissly and Stone Smart sort of down the stretch of this game to try and keep their hopes in the balance here. And the running game, massively disappointing from the Chargers in this game, really. You look at a team total of 22 carries for 59 yards. J.K. Dobbins, pretty underwhelming in this game. Not that it's entirely his fault. And give credit to Arizona. Like I mentioned, they did invest into a number of different linebackers and invest into Budda Baker as well, giving him a contract extension, trying to build up a more well-rounded defense, or at least a defense that has, options for them, as they do have so many pieces that they need to fill on that side of the ball, that being able to shut down what has been a good Chargers rushing attack is certainly impressive from Arizona. But again, with the Chargers, it just feels like their offense is so underwhelming, which is really hard to wrap my head around as somebody who does think that Justin Herbert is a very good quarterback. And, he's been dealing with injuries this season as well, trying to work through this. It was the foot injury in training camp. Then he had the ankle sprain as well. Now he seems to, last night, have suffered a thumb injury. And it's just a situation where the Chargers have have not done anything really to help him out all that much. I think we've seen flashes from Ladd McConkey, the receiver that they drafted in the second round this year. Will Dissly with a nice game last night, like I mentioned, but overall it is still a very mediocre offense, and they need to be better. I don't know if that's coming this season, though. So when you look at the Chargers' playoff hopes, I mean, they're definitely in it because the AFC is as open as it currently is. I want to double check here if I can. The Chargers right now would be the first team out of the playoffs at 3-3. Teams ahead of them, specifically in the Colts and the Broncos, I think are very possible to catch up to either one of them. I don't think that the Colts or Broncos are particularly great. Now, it's kind of a couple different things here. The Chargers do have a very good defense, which I do want to reference as well. And, part of where I am underwhelmed by Kyler Murray, but it's not like it was nothing. I mean, the Chargers defense has become a very good unit. I also think the Broncos defense is better, though. The Colts, I just don't think are particularly all that good of a team. So, I mean, the Chargers are certainly in this race, but I have a hard time imagining they're going to be able to hold off a team like the Bengals behind them. Are the Bengals great? Probably not even either. I mean, been pretty ugly from their offense these past couple weeks. Weird slugfest game that they just played in against the Browns, but they're certainly on the tails of the Chargers and these other wild card teams. If I had to pick right now, I would not anticipate the Chargers are going to make the playoffs. Coming into this year, I had them as an 8-win team, and they're certainly on that pace. The good news for Chargers fans out there is that the schedule is still pretty winnable overall when you look at their level of competition. Their next game is going to be at home against a Saints team that we'll see whether it's Derek Carr or if it's Spencer Rattler. Either way, not a super terrifying group. One that I do think that this Chargers defense will be able to shut down the run game, and that's sort of where the Saints fall apart from there, I believe. And, a lot of winnable games on the schedule from here on out. But we'll just have to see how this all plays out for them. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as we are going to be hitting one of the games that we didn't get to talk about yesterday in the Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. Saquon's first game back in MetLife Stadium as an opposition. So we are going to be diving into a dominant Eagles performance and talking about whether or not they are finally back on the right track. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be talking about Saquon Barkley's return to MetLife over the weekend and ultimately him wreaking havoc against his former team. Of course, playing against the Giants, the team that drafted him in the top 5 and, had all of these bright moments with the franchise. He ultimately walks for the division rival Eagles. A little bit of bad blood there. Saquon talked about the burning of the jersey that rubbed him the wrong way, all of the boos that he got throughout the game, but he showed out. He lived up to the bill that the Eagles paid him this season. This offseason, I should say. 17 carries, 176 yards, and 1 touchdown. And that was with pretty limited workload overall because Saquon took his last rushing attempt in the final minute of the third quarter, ripped off a 41-yard run to get them up the field, and then they took him out. He got a breather then, did not re-enter the game, and what's even more interesting about this too is the fact that really wasn't all that effective in the first quarter either, and that's a Kellen Moore thing with that offense. I mean, as much as the Eagles, I do think, have shown signs of progress, and ultimately, who am I calling out an offensive coordinator as somebody who's watching from my couch? He certainly does know a lot more than I do. I still have such a hard time understanding what the thought process is, though, of why the Eagles insist upon coming out early in these games and letting it fly through the air. Now, I know that Saquon was sort of subdued some against the Browns last week, but this sort of reminded me of the game against the Buccaneers a couple weeks ago, where for some reason the Eagles just seem so intent on establishing the air game first and featuring Jalen Hurts. And it's not an indictment on Jalen Hurts by any means that, I don't think that he should be the lead guy in this offense. Now, I'm not the biggest Jalen Hurts fan, I'll add that as well, but I think it's way more about the fact that Saquon Barkley sort of unlocks this offense with what he's able to do on the ground, and then being able to add the play action passes, having the, read options and such that you can build off of from there, the RPOs, everything like that. I just feel like, you look at the first few drives of this game, and it was a slow start. It was 0-0 at the end of the first quarter, and that's because the Eagles, they ended up having to punt on each of their first three drives. A huge reason why is because they got behind the sticks when dropping back to pass, and Jalen Hurts ends up getting sacked. And, part of that has to do with, and that's the thing too, is, the Eagles, without their starting left tackle in Jordan Mailata, he is currently on injured reserve right now, so he'll be out for the next few weeks. To go up against what has proven to be a tough defensive front for the New York Giants, and to be so reliant on the air, I just don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes there. Again, who am I to necessarily criticize an offensive coordinator like that? But I just feel like it has to be starting the game, getting the ball in the hands of your best player, which is Saquon Barkley. And I know that that's, maybe a little bit up for debate. You do have A.J. Brown on the perimeter as well, who they wanted to feature in this game, and A.J. Brown ends up having a pretty good game for himself as well, all things considered, mostly looking at the touchdown strike and a beautiful ball from Jalen Hurts on that play as well to be able to deliver that. But Saquon, he just needs to be featured more, and ultimately 17 carries in this game. So, I'm sure the Eagles know internally as well that there's only such a limit of being able to ride Saquon that they do need to have a more diverse offense. It just continues to frustrate me how early on in these games they aren't going to Saquon. And then really once they started feeding him, towards the beginning of that second quarter, where Saquon ends up ripping off, I think it was a 55-yard run or something along those lines, that then they were able to, start getting into more of a rhythm. And then you could see, having the offense, the passing offense, have more opportunities because the rest of the team is so focused on the run. And, this wasn't a great game for their offensive line as a whole. As much as I want to talk about, it's about getting Saquon Barkley the ball, it's also just about holding up in pass pro. Like I mentioned, getting behind the sticks, because Hurts was sacked one time on each of their first three drives. That's just not going to cut it. I don't think it's an entire coincidence, though, that as soon as they started establishing the run, that the Eagles were able to hold up better in protection. And again, not a perfect science. I mean, when you have somebody like Dexter Lawrence lined up across from you, that's a scary feat there, because he requires a lot of double teams. He's still able to get through on those plays where he has multiple men on him. He is a legitimate contender now for Defensive Player of the Year. But, I think ultimately this was a needed game for the Eagles to be able to settle back in a little bit after having such a sort of tumultuous past couple of weeks where, Sirianni's been losing his cool a little bit in some of these games. I think it really sort of stems back to that loss against the Falcons, where I can't say they've been a particularly greatly coached team since week 2, and maybe this is kind of the turning point for them where they're able to get their act, or more specifically Sirianni and that coaching staff is able to get their act together a little bit more, because it's a good roster on paper, absolutely, in my opinion. And there are flaws in it, sure. The defense looked very good though, and has held up for them the past 2 weeks. Something to build off of, I suppose. You're getting some key contributions from your rookie cornerbacks in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. That's definitely a positive step forward for them. I've talked multiple times about the season that Zach Bond is having. He's been a huge addition for them. I still don't know if I necessarily trust this defense wholeheartedly, but the Eagles are in a position now where, they're starting to maybe get back on the right track and be able to play their game from there. They obviously have the Commanders now in the division, who seem to be the biggest rival to them for that division title spot this season. I don't anticipate the Cowboys really being in the mix all that much this year, but I think that there's some good that the Eagles can build off of from this. And again, the defense being able to hold up, albeit against a Giants defense. And I made the comparisons to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game from a few weeks ago, and getting off to that slow start, not establishing Saquon early. And in that game against the Bucs offense was good enough to actually make the Eagles pay and get out to a significant enough lead that ultimately didn't matter if the Eagles were getting going late, because the Bucs were able to jump on them early. That cannot be a continued form of success for them, though. We've seen it, again, against the Bucs, I would say as well, against the Saints going back to week 3, against the Browns last week, and against the Giants in this game. So that first quarter offense needs to be better. I think that they are still possibly scoreless in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken. Then there's a stat, something along those lines, that are floating out there. Feel free to correct me in the comment section if I'm off base there, but I think it has still held up to this point that the Eagles have not scored a point in the first quarter, and Nick Sirianni does not seem to be making a big deal about it. I think it's notable when you are 6 games into the year that you can't continue to get away with, having yourself in a hole. And again, like I mentioned, these past 2 weeks against the Browns and the Giants haven't necessarily been facing a hole, because they're playing opposing offenses that are very much lackluster, but they need to figure out how to get out of the gates hotter, because eventually you face off against teams like a Detroit specifically, in terms of them being able to control the game as well and the clock with their rushing attack. I'd say the Packers as well, the 49ers if they're fully healthy, and even within their own division, the Commanders. If the Commanders get out on a lead against the Eagles, they can certainly run the ball, especially when Jaden Daniels is healthy. That might be insurmountable. So the Eagles definitely need to clean that up. Briefly here on the Giants side of things, number one thing that sort of jumped off the page to me watching this game was it was sort of poetic that Saquon Barkley makes his return to MetLife Stadium. He goes off and Daniel Jones ends up getting benched in the game. Now, Daniel Jones is going to be the starter again moving forward, because as we see, Drew Lock is not much of they're not better off with Drew Lock under center either. So that's not going to be a permanent change, but it is just pretty indicative of the way that all of this seemed to shake out for the Giants. And again, when the deals happened at the time of Daniel Jones and Saquon happening at the same time, I assumed that they were going to be able to retain Saquon eventually. the Daniel Jones deal, it has an out after this year. The Giants are certainly going to take it, and they took their shot, I suppose. It didn't work out for them. Daniel Jones was really bad in this game. It's very clearly still, though, more than just Daniel Jones. And now the Giants have a defense that is, somewhat formidable. I understand, they end up allowing 28 points in this game, but the Giants punted on every drive other than one in this entire game. And it was that 2-minute drill right before the end of the first half where they ended up kicking a field goal. That is, just atrocious to have that many punts. Certainly a different mindset than what we saw from the Giants on Sunday Night Football in Week 6 against the Bengals. But, the Giants have a lot to work on, and losing Andrew Thomas, their starting left tackle, their best lineman by a significant margin, is certainly a huge loss for them. And this is where I think that the Giants season really does start to spiral out of control. They're going to move on from Daniel Jones after this offseason, but if you think that they are just a quarterback away from being Super Bowl contenders, I would reorient that mindset. Their defense, much improved. And again, you look at the likes of an Ojulari as well, who has taken on a much bigger role in these past couple weeks with Kayvon Thibodeau out. He has continued to produce for them. He ends up getting home for a sack. He had a couple in that Bengals game as well. That they have a secondary that is young right now, but I do think has a lot of high upside ultimately once they do, sort of reach their ceiling. Deonte Banks, Tyler Nubin, Trey Hawkins I'd throw into that conversation as well. Drew Phillips is another one. So at this point, I'm just listing names, but I'm just saying that, all of these players have had moments this season that once they get a little bit more experience under their belt, I do think that the Giants can start to shape up into being a playoff contender once again. But I still do think that they are more than just a quarterback away. And, you look at that offensive line, it's held up pretty well for a lot of this season. Andrew Thomas is gone now. That already was a huge loss, but, it wasn't Daniel Jones and Drew Lock, I suppose, as well. The Eagles got home for 8 sacks in this game. That's not all because of just Andrew Thomas missing. This is a situation that the offensive line as a whole does still need a lot of work as well. So it's probably going to be the Giants drafting a quarterback when it's all said and done after this year, and that's the right decision for them. But there are other pieces as well that they definitely need to improve upon. But let me know what your takeaways from this game were, as we are going to now be reflecting on Week 7 as a whole, and we're going to be doing our weekly Panic Meter segment where we are going to rate teams on a scale from 1 to 10 based off of how concerned they and their fans should be after their team lost this past weekend. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be hosting our weekly segment of the NFL Panic Meter. For those who are new here, every week we look at some of the most prominent teams in the NFL that lost this past weekend, and we rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 based off of how concerned they and their fans should be following a loss. So without further ado, diving into it here, we usually start with the Monday Night Football games. And we're going to be talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers out of the gates here, because Tampa, obviously, again, losing on Monday Night Football. My first inkling was to say that this is not a massive deal for them based off of the fact that they still do play in a very manageable division. It's them and the Atlanta Falcons that are the two teams that are in contention for this. Maybe the Saints find a way to be able to turn their season around after what I believe is 5 straight losses for them. I think it's pretty unlikely at this point that the Saints are in serious contention. That being said, I mean, who knows? Like I mentioned, it's not like either one of these teams at the top are excellent. The reason the Buccaneers are now on the more concerned side than not is the reason that they lose Mike Evans and Chris Godwin last night. Now, Godwin, it sounds like out for the entire season. We don't have an exact confirmation, but it appears that it was a dislocated ankle that he suffered late in the game against the Ravens. I think it's a whole conversation about whether or not that was the right decision to keep him in the game, that I don't really want to go down that route because, either way, we're playing, I guess at this point it would be Tuesday morning coaching from the couch that... Now, that's not necessarily fair to Bulls. I did think it was a very questionable decision, though, to keep Godwin and the starters in that late, especially after losing Evans earlier in the game. Evans, on the other hand, sounds like he's going to be out for a few weeks, and this is a crucial stretch coming up for the Buccaneers, where they play the Atlanta Falcons for a chance, trying to hope that they don't get swept in the season series against Atlanta, because it will be extremely difficult for Tampa Bay to be able to overtake Atlanta for that division lead if they lose both of their games. They lost a few weeks ago to Atlanta on Thursday Night Football in a game that got away from them. So they need to sort of find a new way to be able to put things together, and I don't know if they're going to be capable of doing that. Now, the bright side is that the running game has seemed to come a long way this season based off of where they were at last year, and that's going to have to be where the Buccaneers take advantage here, especially against a Falcons defense that just last week got pushed around a little bit by a Seahawks offensive line that has been one of the worst performing O-lines in the NFL. So it's going to come down to the trenches, I think, this upcoming weekend against the Falcons. Should be interesting, but concern mounting absolutely with 2 crucial injuries for the Buccaneers, so I have them at a 6. Now, since we're talking about the NFC South anyways, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. And I think that there is less concern for Atlanta because they're healthier, is the reality of the situation. Now, that being said, I've been very much underimpressed with what I've seen from Atlanta up to this point in the season. I really don't think that Kirk Cousins has been very good. I know that he was able to carve up Tampa Bay's defense in that Thursday Night Football game a couple weeks ago. I thought that that was one of the most embarrassing defensive that was probably the single worst defensive performance from a unit for Tampa Bay in that game a few weeks ago against Kirk Cousins, putting no pressure on him, just playing this soft zone coverage, giving him the underneath routes. That's certainly something to monitor as well coming up in this week is, can their defense actually get to Kirk Cousins? Because we just saw last week, the Seahawks were able to apply some pressure on him, and he was off as a whole. Now, I think that the Falcons have the upper hand in this upcoming game against the Buccaneers. They already have the upper hand because they won their first matchup. And like I keep saying, this is a division that is so winnable for the Falcons. And I think that, at this point, my preseason expectations for the Falcons were, be in contention for winning the division, make the playoffs. Based off of that, I have them at a 4 right now on the panic meter, where there are certainly issues with the team, Kirk Cousins especially, concerning. But ultimately, if they make the playoffs, this is a successful season in my eyes. As the season heats up, if they seem to think that they are Super Bowl contenders, I'd be more concerned if that's where your expectations are. But as for being a playoff caliber team, the Falcons are right in that mix, so I have them at a 4. Next up, the Los Angeles Chargers losing last night as well against the Arizona Cardinals. And this is a situation where this year's so far from playoff or bust, where it's year one of the Harbaugh rebuild. The hope is to be competitive. Now, they benefited from having a little bit of an easier schedule coming into this year. I think that it's probably gotten a little bit more difficult based off of how these games have actually shaken up to this point. Chargers are 3-3 right now. I have them at a 3 on the panic meter. I'm not nervous about them because, again, they're in the mix right now for the playoffs, which is basically all you really should have been asking for coming into this year. I know they were a stealth playoff team pick for a lot of people coming into this season. I had them just outside that, and they're 500 through 6 weeks. That's just about exactly where I would have anticipated that they would be. Justin Herbert is still playing extremely well despite the lack of help that he's getting. The defense has been pretty great up to this point in the season as well. So definitely some real positives for LA up to this point. Don't think that they are capable of winning a playoff game. I don't think. Capable, it's a pretty low bar. Maybe they're capable if they get a great matchup, but more or less, I think that this is a situation where the Chargers are just trying to take steps forward this year, and it seems like they're on the track there, so I have them at a 3 on the panic meter. New York Jets lost lost 2 nights ago now in pretty embarrassing fashion against the Pittsburgh Steelers. After getting out to a start, it was all Steelers from then on out, and Davante Adams clearly did not make the difference that a lot of Jets fans had banked on. I still stand by the fact that that was a must-do deal for the Jets to be able to pull the trigger on that. This is basically championship or bust for them this season, at least, trying to make the playoffs. And right now they are on the outside looking in at 2-4. They need to be better than that, of course, is, an obvious statement. And I don't really know, or they're 2-5 now, excuse me. I don't know if those reinforcements are really coming. Now, what I will say is Rodgers and Davante Adams should probably, be able to rekindle some of that chemistry a little bit more. Adams with a very disappointing debut for the Jets. I still stand by this offensive line does not have to be quite as bad as it is. And I thought they looked all right against what is a pretty tough, all things considered, Steelers defense. So there's a lot of room to grow. They have weapons on the offensive side of the ball. Defense is also definitely a concern of mine up to this point where, when they've gone up against the better offenses, they've been pushed around pretty significantly. So at this point, Jets aren't looking to be a playoff team, and that is a huge concern because up to this, what do they really have after this year? Rodgers, this could be his last season. He's probably thought to himself on a number of occasions, why did I decide to come back after the Achilles injury last year? So we'll see. This is very concerning for the Jets, though. I have them at an 8 on the panic meter scale. Still certainly a way for them to get better. Reddick is supposed to rejoin the team as well, which could help out that defense, but things are looking very poor right now for the Jets, who have some work to do to climb their way back into this thing. The San Francisco 49ers, I've been pushing off being worried about them all season long. The slow start really was not a huge deal to me as they were dealing with all of these different injuries. They just keep piling up, though, these injuries. And Brandon Ayuk now going to be out for the remainder of the season. I understand Ayuk wasn't having a great year to begin with, but it's still a huge loss. They just paid him a significant amount of money this offseason. He was supposed to be a part of this plan, and he's a big element for why this offense has been so dynamic and explosive over the course of these past few seasons. Now, 49ers very much still not out of anything, and they have reinforcements coming, and Christian McCaffrey and Dre Greenlaw eventually. Still don't know exactly when that is, but the 49ers are still going to be a good team. But at this point now, they're 3-4. They're trailing in their division behind the Seattle Seahawks, where I do think the Niners are still probably going to win this division, but it's a huge question mark now. And you look at the Niners, who have lost a couple of these divisional games already to the Cardinals and to the Rams. They have some work cut out for them. And I think that they're very much still capable of it, but I am certainly more worried now than I was before. I have the 49ers at a 6 on the panic meter. Minnesota Vikings, they lose their first season of the game. They lose their first game of the season, and there's not much to say about this. I feel very confident still in the Minnesota Vikings. They should still be ecstatic with the way that this season is going for them. There are maybe some issues that we saw Sam Darnold still not... Sam Darnold was very good in that Lions game, and he's certainly not the reason why they lost. The interception was not good, though. That, took points off of the board for them and onto the board for the Lions. And then he missed a throw on that final drive as well. But ultimately, he's still good. He's limited, though. Defense as well. Very well performing. Brian Flores has done an excellent job up to this point in the year. He has them punching above their weight class a little bit. And, the defense still, they scored a defensive touchdown as well to give them I think it was to give them the lead late in that game as well. So to say that the Vikings should be, that they're coming back to reality, I don't think is totally fair. I have them at a 2. Very little concern for me for the Vikings. They're still in a prime position to make the playoffs, to have a chance at this division. So I have them at a 2 out of 10. And then final team here, the Houston Texans. It's tough to tell with the Texans because we really haven't gotten the full version of their offense, where they were missing Joe Mixon for a few weeks. Now they're missing Nico Collins, and we saw their offense take a huge hit this past week without Nico. Some of it's certainly still on CJ Stroud as well, where he wasn't able to come up in the moments where they needed him. He finished with just 86 yards, I believe it was, the lowest mark of his career, and that was with getting a good Joe Mixon game. And I thought their defense played pretty well as well. But need to start seeing a little bit more from CJ Stroud. I definitely wouldn't say he's in a sophomore slump. He's still having a fine season, but he's looking a little bit more human, which I think is totally normal to anticipate out of a player in their second season, where these defensive coordinators have more to go off of in terms of their tape. So the Texans, there's very little reason for concern for them. Yeah, CJ Stroud, maybe it's been a little shaky up to this point in the season, but they are still should comfortably be able to win their division. I know the Colts are maybe in the mix. I think this is all the Texans in the AFC South, and they should be able to bounce back pretty easily. And, they're certainly in contention for one of the top seeds in the AFC. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are going to be switching gears here for our final segment of the show, though, and we're going to be previewing tonight's NBA regular season action. The season tips off tonight. We have a couple very fun matchups between the Knicks and the Celtics and the Timberwolves and the Lakers. So we're going to be talking about some of the key storylines, keys to the game, and ultimately handing out some predictions. But before we do so, we have to take our final break of the show. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day. And today is the tip-off of the NBA regular season. Finally, long awaited. And, I think we're going to get a couple very good games out of the gates here to kick off the season. Of course, starting off, the Celtics raising the banner number 18, and they face off against one of the top contenders in the Eastern Conference in the New York Knicks. This is a game where you want to talk about some keys to it. It has to start with the Knicks. We already mostly know who the Celtics are. Now, no Kristaps Porzingis is definitely a big factor there, but even still, Porzingis was pretty limited in terms of availability during last year in the regular season and the playoffs. This is, mostly the same roster. The Knicks, on the other hand, have a ton of, changes in the lineup. The Mikal Bridges factor, the Karl Anthony Towns factor. They are very reliant right now on a number of new pieces, and we saw some preseason action. We saw Thibodeau play these guys during the preseason, maybe a little bit more to help build up the chemistry there, but largely still a lot of unknowns there. So a couple keys to this, and speaking of these new additions, number one is Karl Anthony Towns, where he is going to have a key role for the Knicks this season to be able to take down the Celtics. Ultimately, when you look at the way that this Celtics roster is constructed, even when Kristaps Porzingis is available for them, the number one mismatch for them in the NBA last season was Nikola Jokic. And the fact that the Celtics really didn't have answers for a big that can take over a game offensively. And, Embiid is, I know he's one of the best bigs in the league as well. He's definitely, at times, given the Celtics some problems, but Jokic and what he is able to provide in running an offense through him is massively important, because it sort of forces the Celtics into a bit of a predicament where, you look at, and I don't want to get into a Jokic versus Embiid debate here, but specifically what makes Jokic so much more impressive to me, and specifically against the Celtics defense, is the fact that he is able to pose a very real threat in the post and mid-range game. And then when they send the doubles, he is, of course, one of the best passers in the NBA, to the point where you have to have basically another player in the paint around that baseline for those Aaron Gordon lobs that he loves so much. And the Celtics just massively struggled with that matchup in particular. Karl Anthony Towns is a very skilled big that comes in and he's able to provide a number of different things. One of the things as well for the Celtics, and we saw this in the playoffs, is Jason Tatum was guarding a lot of fives during the playoffs. And specifically, it was Evan Mobley and it was Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, whoever the Mavericks had on the court at the time. And it was because there just wasn't really... Tatum's a big guy, obviously. He's got to be 6'10", 6'11". I don't know what his exact listed height is, but super lengthy, very strong, able to hold up on his own against less skilled bigs. Cat is one of those skilled bigs that can do some damage there, that it shouldn't be just as simple of putting Tatum on him. That being said, when the Celtics faced off against the Timberwolves last year, there were a number of occasions where Drew Holiday was the primary defender on Karl Anthony Towns. Now, part of that as well is baked into the fact that there was a Rudy Gobert standing on the court as well that was not much of a threat whatsoever. The Knicks have the spacing to be able to make the Celtics' usual defensive patterns a little bit more complicated, and I think that he's going to have a huge role for the Knicks in general, for the season as a whole, but specifically for this matchup against the Celtics, he needs to be reliable. And especially on the other end as well, where, yes, the Celtics are more known from jacking up threes. Towns is going to have to be active defensively. Is he going to be able to, hold his own on the perimeter? And, before he did have Gobert. And one of Cat's biggest issues for a lot of his career early on was the fact that he was a bit of a liability defensively. They add Rudy Gobert to the mix to help lift up the defense, which worked for them. Now that Cat is the anchor, how's that going to look? Now, that being said, the Knicks have other defensive playmakers as well, and OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges to be able to help supplement some of that as well. Just going to be very interesting, really, to see how overall this Knicks team gels, and I don't think it's going to be clean enough game one to be able to take down the Celtics. The spread in this game is 5.5 points at home. I think the Celtics are going to be able to come out and win this game somewhat handedly. It should be a good game, and there should be moments of back and forth, but ultimately, I think that the way that the Celtics have basically spent this entire offseason, with a new roster, obviously the other end of the Karl Anthony Towns trade, Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo in their new home. How are they going to look against the Lakers? This game could be pretty clunky on both sides, and we'll see. I expect this to be a bit of a defensive slugfest overall. Over-under in this game is 222.5. If I had to make any one play on this game, it would probably be the under, where I think that both of these teams are going to be able to gum things up a little bit. You have two of the best defensive bigs in the NBA, Rudy Gobert and Anthony Davis, and outside of that as well, a number of tough defenders to be able to work through as well. That Timberwolves, I think, are going to, have a little bit of that chip on their shoulder. Anthony Edwards, it just feels like, he always has that energy. Lakers are going to be fired up too, and they're going to be looking to sort of establish themselves. JJ Redick, LeBron James, that whole ordeal. Very interesting report from Shams Charania that Bronny James is supposedly supposed to get minutes early on in this one. No, and it's not going to just come down to this. But respectfully, if Bronny James gets significant minutes in this game, the Timberwolves are winning this game. And Bronny James, again, I don't want to bury a kid who's just coming into the NBA. And everybody says, well, he should be treated like a 55th overall pick because that's what he was. I agree. A 55th overall pick doesn't get significant minutes in the first game of the season. And I think that would be far too much adhering to LeBron James, and JJ Redick at some point is going to have to instill his own identity onto this team and show that he's more than just LeBron's podcasting buddy. And I believe in JJ Redick 100% as a basketball mind, but I was shocked when I saw that report, and we'll see. Well, I don't want to make too much of a big deal about Bronny James playing in this game because who knows? There's a chance that it doesn't happen. But ultimately, I do think that I lean the Lakers in this game in particular. They have the more continuity. I mean, Anthony Edwards, the issue is I don't know if the Lakers have anybody that's going to be able to guard him. Now, I do have to double check here real quick if Jared Vanderbilt's available for them, because that would make part of a factor in it, that at least that's a guy that you feel like you can throw on him. Vanderbilt is not available. So that being said, I don't know who is going to cover Anthony Edwards. I suppose it's going to be a group effort. Maybe it's Rui Hachimura. I guess that is the primary against him. That's actually a pretty bad sign. Now that I'm talking this out loud as well, again, I'm not picking a winner in this game. I would more so lean with the under more than anything. But, should be two very fun, fascinating games. You have a couple teams that are obviously very much shaken up in terms of a roster perspective. In the Knicks in the first game, Timberwolves in this game, and then, Celtics defending their championship, a potential Eastern Conference Finals matchup in this first game. Second game, I guess it's the Lakers playing, which I don't think that the Lakers are a particularly good team. But you know what? that's kind of the whole reason that we're here, is seeing whether or not they can match up against the team that was in the Western Conference Finals last year. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.